Welcome to Salt of the Earth Farm Stories, where the heart of farming comes alive. From the soil that nurtures our crops to the animals that roam our pastures, we'll explore the beauty and challenges of life on the farm. So grab your boots as we celebrate the stories that connect us to the land and each other.
Welcome to Part B of my chat with Jason McAinch. This episode is proudly brought to you by Kiewa Catchment Landcare Groups, supporting those who care for land and community.
We want a plant to be photosynthesizing as much of the year as possible, capturing that sunlight as much of the year as possible so that it's converting it into sugar.
Now, Jason, as you've heard, is a grazing management champion. And in this episode, we get straight into the hot topic, how often should we be moving stock? We touch on everything from the growth point of a plant to the mother and daughter tillers. Yep, there's some science in here, but Jason makes it all make sense. We also learn about a fancy word, volatilisation. We explore whether grasslands or trees are better for storing carbon. We touch on future technology like virtual fencing and how he's building resilience into farming systems of tomorrow. And just wait until you hear of his favourite tool in the off-the-wall questions. It's not what you'd expect. Let's get into it. And with rotational grazing, I've heard some people moving them on every day, and they were coming back to that same paddock in 90 days. They had 90 paddocks. Their job initially was just to make a lot of smaller paddocks and move them on once a day, but they had a big herd of like 400 or 600 in one lot moving. And their idea was to take one bite out of that plant that afternoon they were moving on. When you're moving them on, are there different times of the day that the sugars are up higher in the plant, and is that a risk to the animal?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different questions and comments in there, Darren. So I'll deal with the sugar one first. Yeah, we know that there's higher sugar in grass plants later in the day. It's been photosynthesizing, it's been, because remember that during the night, the grass plant is respiring because it's breathing out carbon dioxide all day for 24 hours, but it's breathing out oxygen more during the daytime. It's photosynthesizing more in the daytime, but it's still respiring during the day, but it's only respiring during the night, just like us. So it's burning sugars during the night. So it's got less. So for horse owners, they want quite often to be grazing, right at the dawn, because the high sugar levels in certain grasses is not what horse owners want to graze. So they want to graze then, whereas productive, if you're grazing for production, beef and everything else, sheep, alpacas, whatever that is that you're trying to grow a food or a fibre, you want to be grazing at later in the afternoon or evening. That's not always possible. So again, it comes down to context, and that sort of decision, whether I move them in the morning or in the afternoon, it's less than a 1%er for me.
Right.
But it is something to consider.
But if they're coming off not much at all into a real fresh paddock with high sugars at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, is that a possible risk?
Yeah, it depends on what's going on. So if they've been on a hay-based diet or straw-based diet, and then for weeks and weeks in a containment area, and then we let them out into the 100-acre paddock, they get a choice of whatever's there, and it's not fully recovered, it will be unproductive. Farmers, particularly with cattle, will understand that the byproduct comes out very quickly out the back end of those cows. It comes out really quickly out of the sheep as well, mind you. But yeah, that's an upset stomach. Now, it confuses me a lot that farmers would do that by going from this containment feed to 100% grass and think that's okay, because they wouldn't do that coming from grass to 100% grain diet, because that's upsetting the whole function of that gut. We need consistency. And I often talk about this, about the curry I like curries. I cook a few curries here at home, and everything goes pretty well most of the time. But if I go over to India and say, geez, I'd really like that curry off a street vendor, it's the same curry, surely. But there's a side effect from that curry over in India that I didn't experience with my own one at home.
Yeah.
So that's my sort of message about don't just move them from this feed to that feed overnight. Because the guy living next to that Indian street vendor that's been eating that food isn't getting the same effect that I have. So it's because that gut has adapted to that food. And it takes about 3 weeks for the gut to change over to have the right bacteria and fungi that are able to adapt to that feed. They're sitting there, if we're feeding grain introducing grain for the first time ever into our animals, it will take longer because there's no grain gut bacteria. Whereas if they were fed grain 8 weeks ago, that bacteria will be there. We just still got to give it time to actually multiply to then actually use that food. It's exactly the same with grass. So we don't want to be transitioning them from different feeds. We want to do it slowly. So it's exactly the same. If we've got a different crop, and it could still be a multi-species crop, which is quite good to do, but if they're coming from a bent grass dominated feed to this beautiful multi-species crop, and hang on, it's got all this mixture of beautiful things that'll be great, it can still upset their gut. So we just want to transition slowly into that. Now, the question about the 90 days and moving them every day, again, depending on what recovery. 90 days is good at certain times of the year. It might be 60 days, it might be 45 days, it might be 120 days, all based on recovery. The idea of moving them frequently is about what's happening with that recovery of that plant. So I was talking about the battery and the battery pushing out that leaf. Now that in springtime can happen really quickly, can happen within hours that they are pushing out a leaf. At this time of year, yes, I'll be pushing out a leaf, but it's a lot slower. So we try to find the balance between moving them frequently and not finding whatever context works for you. So that's when I said that dairy farmers have some sort of a advantage over some of them are moving them twice a day. So they're putting them into a paddock and they don't go back to that paddock until it's re-recovered. They're only in there for 8 to 12 to 16 hours, depending on their milking time. Not a lot of graziers with sheep and cattle will be moving them that frequently. But the reason why we want to move them frequently is that regrowth that comes from that battery. We don't want the animals to go back and graze that.
Yeah.
And I liken that to the a la carte menu, the buffet. And if I go to the buffet or my kids go to the buffet, the kids will go back to that ice cream machine time and time again. And even when the ice cream machine is pushing out that watery mess, they'll still keep going back there. And it's the same with cows and sheep. They liked what they ate there yesterday. They'll go back and see if there's anything left. And if they do graze, they're grazing that battery pushed out. So for me, though, the balance is, you're a gold medalist. You've made the Olympics. You're now a gold medalist if you're moving them once a day. You're brilliant if you're moving them twice a day. You're a silver medalist. Fantastic. You're right up there. You can be proud as punch. Every 3 days, bronze medalist, doing a great job. You've made the final. You're moving them every week. Thank you. If you're not in the final, we've sort of forgotten about you. If you're not moving them frequently and letting that plant recover, you might be still an Olympian because you're doing something great. But for me, that's sort of where I like to say, please try to aim for being up this end. For some people, the aim might be just to move them 2 or 3 times a year. And I'll say thank you, because that'll actually have an effect. It's better than just letting them roam the entire property, with no gate shut, no internal fences. That's going to cause more damage than you just having one fence up and moving them from one side to the other.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. But I want you to try to achieve this, moving them every day if possible, every second day. There's a guy by the name of Gabe Brown that's quite famous, and he talks about moving them in this huge high density, moving them 6 times a day. Now that's not achievable for anyone really, but that's where he's at. And to be honest, he's got there after a long time, so for me to go onto a farm and say, try and do that is ridiculous, because you won't have the right animals, the stresses on those animals, the stress on yourself to just do that. If you want to get there, just take time getting there.
But then what happens when a paddock we've let rest too long?
So when we've let them rest too long, there's what we've talked about before, was that grass plant will often get too dense. The growing point will move up, those type of things. But also what can tend to happen is, as a result of a few of those things, is that it opens up and that the grass plants will start to have dead material at the bottom, which creates this great little micro environment for woody plants to grow. So even those that we talked about, even with paddocks that have constant grazing for 365 days of the year, you will still see times where woody plants will grow. Now they can be native trees and shrubs, or often they're blackberry, gorse in central Victoria, those type of plants, because that grass plant is, for me, has created this perfect little micro environment. It hasn't been grazed, even though the grass, the cattle or sheep have been in there for the entire year. There'll be plants there that they don't want to eat. And because maybe they weed on them, maybe they pooed on them or whatever in the early stages, and then they just become, no, I don't really want to eat that. Maybe become too long, too much fibre. And so they fall over, and it creates this microenvironment for woody weeds to grow. So for me, that's some of the issue with letting grass, if we leave it too long, even if we're on a long recovery, if we leave it too long, we can see woody plants start to occur in our pastures.
And then we've got a bigger problem on our hands.
Then we can have a bigger problem if they're not, For me, a weed is always a plant out of place, and it could be any type of plant that's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So whether that be natives or other things that are growing, ideally natives are mostly pretty good, but sometimes they can grow in the wrong spot. So we need to, that grazing management about, having the density enough so that plants are either grazed, stood on, or next time they'll be grazed or stood on, so that they're defoliated is really an important part of our grazing management.
Thank you. Can grazing the right way contribute to carbon sequestration?
Yeah, and as I talked about before, is that whole idea of the battery, and that the only way to get carbon into the soil is from that grass plant, having that signal. So, it's really interesting. Data does not necessarily result in wisdom or knowledge. Data would show that in soil, grassland puts more carbon into soil than a tree plantation.
Is that right?
Yeah, but trees have a lot of the carbon above the ground. So, there's where data and stuff lies. But so you can get lots of carbon into soil by grasslands.
Yeah.
So not quite as much as trees do above ground, but certainly in the ground we can have carbon going into soil. So
the tree will be storing it in the wood.
In the wood. Yeah. Yeah, and if we've already got a grassland, actually maintaining that grassland is a good way, and by managing it, allowing that recovery, allowing that grazing to occur at the right times, does create that way of getting carbon into the soil.
So what does grazing management look like in the outback, in these large paddocks?
Yeah, so for me, I haven't had a lot to do, or very little, if any at all, with those outback, but certainly on big properties, it becomes a big challenge. But we know that water is a really important part of that. So animals won't walk a long distances to water. So quite often we need to move water so that we may not need paddocks as such, but we can use water to actually be an important part so they graze certain areas. And I know that's happening in some outback areas. I think the other thing which I'm really excited about is the virtual fencing. And I think that will be a game changer for
rotational grazing.
For rotational grazing in a lot of different ways. I think it'll be, I don't understand the technology yet and how it all works, but I think being able to control our grazing management without the need to put up a lot of steel in fencing will be fantastic. It'll be quite cost effective. And then for me, being able to graze certain areas at certain times.
And that could be all done at home on your phone.
Yeah, on the phone or going to work or whatever other job you might have, you're not there moving them. So for me, grazing around water soaks, there might be times of the year where we don't want stock grazing around water soaks. We don't want stock grazing around a tree plantation. I don't need to put up a fence around that tree plantation because my virtual fence will do that. Or I don't want them grazing on the river or the creek. So I can see, virtual fencing doing a great job at that, let alone I'm going to shear next week or I'm going to sell some next week. I'll start bringing them up to the yards for me.
Perfect.
I don't know whether we'll get rid of the dog as well, but I still think there'll be needs for fencing, but will the virtual fencing replace some of the internal fencing?
And is that likely to be a collar around their neck with a slight little buzz or a?
Yeah. I think that's the technology, and so it'll be really interesting to see how cost effective that is and that technology is. But I really think it'll be quite a big change.
And how do you deal with parasite control in a grazing system?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. The people that that are further along this journey of this grazing techniques will often talk about not having to do parasite control anymore. One of the first things people will say to me when they've started implementing this system is they noticed that the dung from their cattle disappeared really quickly. So instead of it being a saucepan that sat there for a year like it had been treated with some nuclear sort of isotopes or something like that, they see them disappear really quickly. The background of that is that the soil is starting to do what it needs to do. So it's healthier. So there's bacteria and fungi involved. And then we see dung beetles will often get involved. So all of a sudden, these dung patches are being used and integrated into the soil much quicker. But also what we see with this rotational grazing, particularly when we're moving them quite frequently, is they're not eating next to their own urine and dung constantly. So what happens is they're on a fresh bit frequently. They're not being forced. If you're managing, and then this is the art of it, saying, are they hungry or not hungry? And I'm managing that part of it as well by watching what's going on with the animal's behaviour, watching what's happening with the grasses and how much they've eaten, and really paying attention to some of that kind of stuff. So therefore we're moving them frequently and they're not having to eat next to their own dung. We don't have that life cycle of all these parasites being completed because a lot of these parasites go through the gut, out the back, come back in through the mouth, and keep going around and around. Now, to say that there'd be none happening is incorrect. But again, if we think about what happened on the grasslands thousands of years ago, were some affected by these parasites? Surely there was, but the vast majority weren't treated with something. They survived. And that's what we talk about quite frequently. If we do our worm egg counts and stuff like that, the idea is to not have zero. The idea is to have possibly some, because we have some sort of immunity to that. And it is important, though, that, again, not that we shouldn't drench or anything like that, is that if an animal needs to be drenched, drench them. But what we're seeing is a lesser reliance on that with the rotational, a well-managed rotational grazing system. And when we're introducing any other animals in, that we make sure we follow what those recommendations are of having a containment area, so that we're not bringing those parasites on. Just have that containment paddock. If we're bringing in a bull or a ram or something like that, often just have them isolated for a day or two before we introduce them to the rest of the herd or the flock.
You mentioned dung beetles just then, and I love what they do, but I think that's a whole new episode one day.
Oh,
they're fascinating.
They are unbelievable. I spent a day doing a guy come in doing a presentation in my world. We talked about soil scientists, blowing my mind. Well, these dung beetle guys are the same. It's unbelievable, and how much we don't know about the native dung beetles that are here and their role, and and how we can get more of them on our properties, because they are fantastic at what they do.
The underground workforce, I call them.
Yeah. They call them the eco engineers.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. So they're fantastic, and again, they can be impacted by dry and wet, and we just need to understand that. But again, it's above my level of comprehension.
Well, right now my head is full, Jace, but I want to somehow see if we can summarise what we've talked about. Why are diverse plants and 90% ground cover important goals?
Because we want a plant to be photosynthesizing as much of the year as possible, capturing that sunlight as much of the year as possible, so that it's converting it into sugar.
Thank you, mate. How do green leaves convert solar energy into animal production?
Well, it's the same. It's creating sugars that then now animals can eat and make into beautiful beef or lamb in most cases, or fibre.
Would you agree with the phrase "take half, leave half" in pasture management?
It's one of those catch-alls, that again, it comes down to that art versus science. It's understanding. If I've got a plant that's as high as my gumboot, I'm going to be taking more than half. So it's not a bad thing. Like a lot of things, the stubby, concept, they're okay, but that's not what I'm really about. I would, my preference is understand the plant's recovered, understand that blunt leaf, and then understand where that battery storage is in that bottom 4 to 5 centimeters, and let's build from that foundation. And some of those other things have their place, but for me, understand this other foundation is really important.
Is grazing management more complex than people think?
I don't think it's terribly complex, but when I start talking about these type of things, I have a job as a result of it being not widely known, but I don't think it's overly complex. I think it can get more and more complex, but we can only, I can make it very complex because I have a passion for it. But basically, I think it's much simpler than that. But I think it's really important to get those foundations right. So once you understand those foundations, you can build whatever building you want on top of it.
So a simple message to someone just starting out with a grazing management plan.
understand those how the grass plants work on your property. That's just, and take time to learn about that. Take some time to understand what your animals, spend a bit of time out in the paddock watching what they're doing is really important part if you're just sort of starting out on it. And I would say to anyone that's not started out on it, some of the best things, why farmers buy property, why they're a farmer is to spend time outside, spend time with their animals. So why don't you do that? Enjoy that rather than thinking, I've got to fix the fence, I've got to feed this, I've got to do that, I've got to do that. Sometimes just spending a bit of time in the paddock, enjoying them munching and carrying on, that brings a smile to my face thinking about it. And I know so many farmers that have gone out there and they tell me how much they feel so fantastic about it. But also those that have told me about doing that and then telling their city friends that they're doing that, and their city friends think they've completely lost the plot. So that's okay. I think that's perfectly fine. If they think we've lost the plot by standing out there, my wife thinks I've lost the plot with talking about grass all the time. So,
well, I want to tell our city friends that our farmers love their animals.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whole concept of, I've got a story, and I don't know whether I'll get in trouble for this story, Darren, but
This will be good.
my wife is not a farmer, and she said to me one day, "You don't have names for all your cows." And, I've got a name for my dog and my cat. You don't have names for your cows. I said, I absolutely have names for my cows. That cow there is 2026. That's her name. And then I said, her mother is 1826 and her grandmother is 1426. Do you know the grandmother of your dog and your cat? Because I certainly know, and they were brilliant cows. And I know the father of those cows, those ones as well. And my dad was much better at knowing. He knew 400 of the 500. I might have known 200 of the 500 back that sort of that far, but my father knew that much better than me. And I often say that to people, that we know these animals really well. We actually care for them. It's our job every day. I used to get quite distraught if, a trough failed and they didn't have water for every minute of every day, or they don't have feed. I wake up, and one of the great challenges for farmers is that they care so much for their animals and their property that when these dry times happen, their mental health really suffers because their self-worth, they want to help their animals. They want to help the environment. That's what they're passionate about. And they get up every day knowing that. They get up every day looking at the rain gauge, knowing what temperature it is. Our city friends don't, and so they know what the environment is doing. They know, and that impacts them so much that. So it's hard. It's hard at these times when the conditions are tough for them to not think that their self-worth has been impacted. I always like to say that that's okay. It's okay to feel not so crash-on about things, but talk to your friends, talk to your neighbours. What's also difficult and sometimes not talked about, Darren, about this is the farmers that are going okay, that have put in plans, they've been able to adapt, whether just by luck that they sold their animals off earlier because they had something else go on. Quite often they feel bad and guilty about making good decisions or having feed that their neighbours don't have. So even those in good positions often feel the mental strain of feeling the guilt, and they won't necessarily go out and talk to their neighbours about that, or don't feel they can talk to their neighbours, or go to the local footy and talk to their friends because they're feeling okay about their position, but they still feel guilty and bad about feeling okay.
Yeah.
So sort of doesn't work. And the other thing about this is it has a flow-on effect then to our towns. The local barber doesn't see the farmer as often because the farmer says, well, I can't afford it, or she can't afford to go into the hairdresser. Want to make sure that farmers are women as well. They're not going into town as much to do what they would normally do. So it has a flow-on effect there. And what I'm trying to do with my job is build resilience. And for me, resilience is about having options. Whatever that is, resilience for me is just simply having more than one option, and so hopefully people make decisions early enough that they've got multiple decisions that they're able to make. Do I do this? Do I do that? Do I sell animals? Do I buy feed? Rather than being caught at the end and saying, I have no other choice other than to do this.
Yeah. But talking is important, isn't it?
Absolutely critical, and getting off the farm, whatever that is, whatever rocks your world, whether that's
Go to the footy.
going to the footy, go fishing with a mate. Don't go by yourself. Go fishing with a mate. Go and whatever your hobbies are. It's always difficult. Farmers, I remember going into a presentation in my very early days I spend a lot of time farming because farming is my hobby. I really enjoy farming. So it's difficult for a lot of farmers to find something else to do. But often I would say at this time of year when things are a bit harder is go out and enjoy the farm, the other bits of the farm. Because it always, when I go on a farmer will always point out something other than their livestock and paddocks. They'll say, oh, there's a wedge-tailed eagle's nest up there. Oh, this tree I planted 25 years ago, look at that. They'll always, everyone, I've never been on a farm where they don't point something out in nature that they've seen or noticed. Oh, look at that anthill, or look at that growing there, or that's where I saw a wombat. Whatever that is, go out and enjoy that part of your farm as much as you can as well.
Jason, in a few words, what signs tell you that a grazing system is healthy?
Simply, healthy animals, healthy soils, and importantly, a healthy bank balance.
Yeah.
It's got to work. Whatever that bank balance is for you, that's a healthy grazing system.
Yeah, good point. Are you concerned about where soil health is heading?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that concerns me most is our ability for our soils to capture rainfall. So we haven't talked about this, but once we get healthy soils, we get their ability to hold and retain moisture is really important. Rather than them being hard crusts, just like a roof surface, and what we tend to see is, and what we're seeing is these flood events. Yes, we're getting some more heavier rain events, but our soils aren't absorbing the amount of moisture that they should be and could be. So we need our soils to be able to capture more moisture rather than it sheeting off very quickly and therefore, causing a flood event further down the stream than us. So
is that because perhaps we've got hard pans down not too far off the surface and our roots, we're not letting the roots break that up?
Correct. So we're not only at the top of the surface, but our ploughing has created those pans. But for me, it's primarily grazing's my thing. So for me, it's about that grazing, but it's about that water, that raindrop hitting a plant, whether it's alive or dormant, it doesn't really matter. And I often liken that to, I know you wanted quick answers here, Darren, but we haven't touched this subject. So I liken it to when rain occurs on a beach and you walk across that beach and it's got a crust on it.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to our soils when rain hits that bare soil. The big clumps, even though they're microscopic, the big clumps only bounce up a little way, and the small, very small particles jump up a long way, and then they settle, and that creates this crust. These small particles create this crust on the soil surface, and then they can be baked or whatever can happen. But often it's because that rainfall event has created these small particles on top, and that makes it impenetrable to the following rain. And so it becomes really hard. So that's really important if we want to be able to slow water down, keep it on our properties, and having soil that's bare and not covered with a green or growing plant adds to that. So we want our soils to be able to capture that rainfall events and store it, and by having larger amounts of carbon, able to do that like a big sponge.
Yeah. Would you suggest putting in some lucerne to try it? They go, I think, just as deep as they go high.
Even further, they'll grow very deep. Not particularly, because in lots of things, I'm not a fan of one particular plant over another. I think if you can grow a little bit of lucerne in a paddock, but again, it depends. As a lot of people that I talk to, they start asking me questions, and I will say, what do you think the answer will be? And they say, it depends. And I go, yes, it depends. So 101 of any farm consultant is always, there's never a one answer, but it depends on a range of different things, whether the aluminium in the soil allows lucerne to grow, if the water table is, all of those type of things. But biodiversity of plants is important, and for people in this area, lots of people are talking about plantains and chicories, and lots of those sort of forgotten plants are really popular and getting more and more popular again. But yeah.
All right, Jace, this is the fun part, mate. We've got the off-the-wall questions.
Fun for whom?
Fun for me. You'll be okay. Now, these are just short answers.
Yep.
You're sitting down with Alan Savory, Joel Salatin, Christine Jones, and Charles Massey. What's the first thing you talk about?
That is a really challenging question. I think I'd let them do a lot of the talking. I'd be the one, because my name's nowhere well known as those guys. So I think I'd be certainly just sucking in the information.
They are incredible people.
Yeah.
What's your favourite tool?
It's something we haven't talked about, but it was a tool that I was fortunate enough to learn from a guy named Phil Shannon, which was a recovery tool. So it was about how I manage my grazing rotation, and understanding it's actually a clothes hanger with some pegs on it. And that's it's brilliant. It's ridiculous. I know. I can see on your face, and everyone that's listening, what the hell are you talking about? Well, maybe I have to come and listen to what I talk about. But yeah, it's something that I used on our property, and it was brilliant. It was so easy to use.
How does that work?
You just have your pegs marking out all your paddocks, and which one you graze, you move the peg from the front to the back. And so you've always got this idea of what's the next paddock to graze. So I don't need to go around the farm looking, or I don't need my diary. I just move the peg each day.
That's all we need.
That's all you need. it's simple, and then you just, how many grazings do I need out of that paddock? And it's easy.
That might nearly answer my next question, but is there one grazing practice that's been a total game changer for you?
That is for me. For a lot of other people, it's been what I talked about, was that they saw their dung, disappearing.
Yeah.
They've got soil health back into their pastures.
If plants at a dairy farm could talk to you, what would they say?
My wife would probably say, "Don't you think they talk to you already?" And I'd probably go, "Oh, well,
You talk back.
I talk back to them." I would hope that they'd say, "Don't graze me yet, I'm not ready."
Yeah.
"Don't graze me yet, I'm not ready." And then they go, "Graze me now."
Let's say you've got a beef farm. What would be the theme song?
This one's a tough one for me because I'm not overly musical. My wife's a musical person in our family. Maybe Cows with Guns. I quite like that song.
Yeah.
Or Love Me Tender.
Love Me Tender.
I don't know whether they don't. Both of them don't quite work. But Cows with Guns I like that. I like that a cow has got a bit of attitude, and wants to roam. Well, the bit that I don't quite like, roam free. No, I want you to roam in my rotation. But
with attitude.
With a bit of attitude, yeah.
Love it. Now, mate, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Probably back in Gippsland somewhere. Yeah, I really, that's where I grew up. It's where I call home. As I talk back right at the start, grew up in, first 4 years of my life in South Gippsland. I'm not sure about South Gippsland, but probably East Gippsland. Yeah, it's a beautiful place of the world. So that'd probably be somewhere down there.
Well, Jace, this has been an absolute fascinating chat, mate. And I so appreciate it. I'm very grateful, and thanks for your time, mate.
No worries. I hope everyone that's listened to it have got to the end.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps up part B with Jason McAinch. What a brilliant mind and such a down-to-earth bloke. From growth points to gut health, carbon to tech, it's clear Jason's got his finger on the pulse when it comes to grazing, all while staying grounded in nature's rhythm. A big thanks to Kiewa Catchment Landcare Groups for supporting this conversation. And as always, thanks for listening.